I just want to reiterate that before we bring any water into our studio on our paper, we want to make sure that we cut the lengths of tape that we need. The last thing we want is to have any water on our roll of tape, because it will activate the gum, and of course the roll of tape will then become useless. So when you finish cutting your tape, put your tape well away. Now we need to stretch our paper, so I'm about to soak it thoroughly. This is a half sheet of Arch hot press paper, and you'll notice that I have my pencil cross on the corner just so that I can see which is the correct side for painting. As I said, we need to soak it thoroughly. I suggest 3 minutes is ideal for this paper. It used to have a harder size or coating, a stronger coating, whereas these days it's a little bit less. So 3 minutes is just the right amount of time. So we've allowed this to soak for 3 minutes. Now you'll notice that the paper is slightly spotty. Don't worry about that, that's absolutely fine. Pick the paper up from one corner and allow it to drip, to take the excess water out. And you'll notice that the paper is almost like fabric. That's how I know that it's got plenty of water in it. And now we're ready to take it downstairs to the studio and apply our gummed tape to it. So as you can see, I have my 3/4 inch deep gator board ready to go, and I have my paper that's been soaked. And now I'm just going to try and centre it over the board and drop it. Sometimes it works first time, other times I have to keep manoeuvring it and getting it square, but it's worth a little bit of perseverance because it's difficult to work with something. It's distracting if it's not quite square. And you also want to make sure that you have a nice margin around the edge of your paper, because you need to make sure that the tape has got something to adhere to. So that looks about right. Now, as I mentioned, I've already got my tape ready to go, and what I'm going to do is submerge it into the water and use my fingers to push it down to make sure that all that tape is submerged and the gum is activated all the way along the edge. So here we go. Pull it through relatively quickly. Now, as I've mentioned previously too, we don't want to get any droplets of the activated gum on our painting surface, so we just have to make sure that we keep the tape around rather than carrying it over our surface. You can see as I'm doing this that there is water being flicked around, so you can appreciate how easy it is to drop that gum on the board or on our paper. I'm just gently smoothing it out. You don't want to put a lot of pressure on there because you'll stretch the tape. This roll of tape is coming to the end, so it's quite tightly bound, and it is easier when you have a newer roll and it's flatter. So I'm easing out any air bubbles that might be underneath that tape. And the lucky last. Now you see, once again I'm going right the way around. I line up the edge of the tape with the edge of the board and then just move it over slightly. What we want is about maybe 1/2 inch of our paper covered and the rest on the board. And don't worry if the tape goes a little bit over the edge, it doesn't really matter too much. Or if you haven't got it particularly square, peel it off, but remember when you reposition it, it needs to be going into the paper and not further out, because you would end up with a line of gum from the previous position where we had the tape. So now I want to make sure that I have no air bubbles at all underneath the tape. That looks fine. So all the gum was obviously activated really well. Now I'm just going to use a clean cloth and gently press down but I'm not stretching, just to ensure that we have all the areas secure. It also speeds up the drying. So that looks great. You may find that you could have air bubbles underneath your paper, but don't worry about that. That's not a problem at all. Your paper will dry totally taut, so don't worry, as I said, if there's any air bubbles underneath the paper. What you have to watch out for is air bubbles underneath the gummed tape. I'm immersing the tape in the water, and we're getting plenty of water activating the gum. Quite often when you take it out, it's a little bit twisted and it's very wet, and there's a lot of wet gum on that tape. It's very tempting to just pull it like this and to try and straighten it, but what you're actually doing is flicking the activated gum onto your paper where you're going to be working later. We'll let that dry and we'll come back to it later, and I'll show you the result of that. Just going to put some clear water on here. Pick up a little bit of pigment. And you can see it's already starting to resist in the areas where the gum has splattered onto the paper. You see these areas here, and also down here where I've moved over my tape when I decided I wanted to pull it further over. And there really is nothing that we can do that's going to fix that, so it's best to avoid it. So now our paper is securely adhered to the board by the brown gummed tape. What we need to do is achieve a totally bone dry surface before we start painting. So we need to bear a few things in mind. We can speed the drying up by putting a clean towel over the surface of our paper and gently patting it and allowing it to absorb any extra moisture that's on the surface of the paper. Never dry your paper on an angle. That will cause an uneven tension and could cause the gummed tape to release, so we certainly don't want to have to re-stretch it. So always dry it flat. I suggest just on the floor somewhere or up on a table. I think out in the sunlight is not such a good thing because it can cause it to dry too quickly. Never use a dryer. That will also cause an uneven tension and cause stress on the tape. How long it takes to dry will depend on the humidity of where you are. You can tell whether your paper is bone dry by using this part of your hand and just touch the surface of the paper. If it feels cool, then you know that there's still moisture in there. If it feels room temperature, then you're reasonably assured that it's quite dry. Now, I'm often asked, how do you remove the gum tape at the end of the painting? The great thing about this tape is it is an archival product, so you don't actually need to remove it. In fact, it is beneficial to leave it on. What it does, it allows a tautness around the edge of your painting, and it keeps it flat and smooth as possible when it's sitting in the frame. But if you find that it doesn't appeal to you to have it left on, just simply cut around the edge. When your painting is finished and you want to remove the paper from the board, you get a sharp knife and just pierce a hole at one of the corners of your paper and slip the knife underneath the paper and slide it along. You'll find it will come off quite quickly, quite easily, and just work your way around. So we'll be ready to begin painting as soon as the paper is fully dry.